Hey guys, Pete here. This is my Game of Thrones Season 7, Episode 3 full recap and review. Quick spoiler check, it's time for you to get out of here if you haven't watched Episode 3 yet, because this video will be a spoiling experience if you haven't watched it. If you're not familiar with my channel, I do a scene-by-scene recap first. It's pretty thorough, and then I discuss the whole thing afterwards. It can get a bit long because there's a lot to talk about, so I put a timestamp link in the description for those of you who want to bypass the scene-by-scene business and get straight to the afterthought. With that out of the way, let's get into it. We open with Jon's landing at Dragonstone straight away. There's a playful exchange where Tyrion calls Jon the Bastard of Winterfell, and he comes back with the Dwarf of Casterly Rock. They smile, catch up, and Davos is formally introduced to Tyrion. Missandei turns things in a more formal direction and then asks them to turn over their weapons, which they do. As they leave the beach, Davos asks her where she's from and gets very little response, and this prompts him to say to Jon that this place has changed. As they start their ascent to the castle, Tyrion asks Jon about Sansa, saying he hears she's alive and well, while jokingly asking if she misses him terribly. While they're walking, they cover some ground and filling each other in. Tyrion assures Jon his marriage to Sansa was a sham and unconsummated. He says she's much smarter than she lets on. Jon says that she's starting to let on, and that his bannermen think he's a fool for coming. Tyrion says of course they do. If he was his hand, that he would advise against it for sure, and that the general rule of thumb is that Stark men don't fare well when they head south, which Jon agrees with, but he brings up the fact that he's not actually a Stark. A dragon ends up flying by and causes Jon and Davos to hit the ground. Their escorts aren't phased at all, and we see this shot where Davos looks up to see Missandei smiling as she looks at the dragons flying above the castle. Tyrion helps Jon up, saying that you never really get used to the dragons, and says, "Come, their mother is waiting for you." We see that Melisandre is looking on from above and that Varys has come to ask her why she hasn't gone to receive their new guests. She explains to him that they didn't end things on good terms because of terrible mistakes that she made. She also lets him know she's decided to head to Volantis. When he says she shouldn't return to Westeros, she explains she will, as she is fated to die there just as he is. Now this was a bit of a surprise because I was expecting her to play some level of an advisory role to, well, really both of these people, Jon and Daenerys. She tells Varys that she's done her part bringing ice and fire together, but I'm inclined to think that she's headed to Volantis for a purpose rather than to sit things out and wait to see what happens. As a quick reminder, Volantis is where Jorah kidnapped Tyrion from the brothel in Season 5. It's where Robb Stark's wife Talisa came from. And most importantly here, it's a very Lord of Light friendly kind of place. The Red God and its priests and priestesses are very popular in the city, especially among the slave population. I think it's notable here that Varys seems to heed what she says about him dying in Westeros in much the same way he was kind of visibly affected in his exchange with Kinvara. Before we cut away from him, he notices what's left of the Greyjoy fleet limping in to land at the beach below, or at least that's the impression we get at the time. Although we don't have a lot of time to think about that at all because the moment we've been waiting for is finally upon us. We see Jon and Davos led into the throne room where Daenerys is sitting patiently waiting for them. And even though we'd seen most of this from the trailers at this point, it was still an awesome moment. And it was even made a little better by the fact that Missandei rattles off Dany's impressive list of titles before Davos has to be prompted to introduce Jon. And then even after that, he kind of pauses as he finishes before he realizes that he probably should mention that, oh yeah, Jon is the king in the north, by the way. Jon and Daenerys exchange pleasantries briefly before getting down to the business of Jon bending the knee. I talked about this in great detail and the whole scenario in a previous video, so I won't rehash the whole details of that, but it pretty much goes like you think it would. She brings up the fact that his ancestor, Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt, bent the knee to Aegon and basically pledged fealty for perpetuity. Obviously, Jon doesn't bend the knee, and here are the points that the two exchange in their back and forth. House Stark was pledged to House Targaryen after the conquest. Daenerys' father burned Jon's grandfather and uncle alive. Daenerys doesn't believe the daughter should be held responsible for the crimes of the father. Jon doesn't believe that he should be held to the oaths of his ancestors. Daenerys wants to know why he's there if not to bend the knee and become Warden of the North. He points out that they need each other's help. She points out that he probably saw the dragons when he came in the Dothraki horde, so she really doesn't need his help. Jon and Davos say that, yeah, you're right, you could have crushed King's Landing without our help, so that's not it, and they reckon the only reason she hasn't done that so far is because she doesn't want to kill innocent people. Then Jon breaks into what we're going to call crazy talk, because that's how the people in the South perceive this, and he tells her about the White Walker threat, which she doesn't really comprehend. Now, it gets really good when she rises and makes a very credible point or points about her path to where she is and the fact she's hatched dragons, which nobody else has been able to do for quite some time. The gravity of this came out a lot more to me on my second watch, but you can see the problem really clearly here. She's following what she believes to be her destiny, and Davos' counterpoint about Jon's equally impressive journey to where he is makes it impossible for these two to team up at this point. Now, Jon does stop Davos when he stops him short when he starts to tell about his resurrection, but I think it's safe to say that each side planted seeds before they all get interrupted by Varys entering the room in a few minutes. Of course, before that happens, Tyrion nearly begs Jon to bend the knee, making some pretty good points, but Jon sort of pulls out some spine, and, that part isn't exactly received well by Daenerys. She mentions that she's the rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms, and that since he won't bend the knee, that means he's in open rebellion. But then Varys comes in, so she basically apologizes that she has to cut it short, sends them off. He's not really her prisoner yet, so on and so forth. After they leave, the Spider explains what happened to the fleet, and then we transition to seeing Theon being fished out of the water. On deck, he explains that Yara has been captured by Euron, and the crew basically ends up walking away from him in disgust. And there was a lot of talk about Theon and his decision to jump overboard rather than die trying to fight against his uncle in the last episode. I mentioned that he basically proved himself as a coward, and several people left comments saying that they thought that he made the right decision. This is what stood out to me right here. I mean, you can make a good argument for him doing what he did, or point out the trauma that he experienced under Ramsay and all of that other stuff. But like I said in the last recap, to the other Greyjoys, he's proved himself a coward, and we see that here. It doesn't matter to them if it was the right choice or not. That's their way of life, and that's the way they see things. So Theon's on the outs right now. I mean, he's shivering on the deck, and none of the people there care why. On the other end of the Greyjoy scale, we see that his uncle is in a much happier state as he drags his prisoners through King's Landing. The small folk seem to love him and hate his captives, which he points out to Yara. Look at them, cheering for a Greyjoy, which is pretty insane when you think about it. Once they enter the throne room, the seriousness of the situation for these women is illustrated in the face of Ellaria when she sees the mountain. Euron does his shtick, and Lena Headey absolutely owns the scene with her reaction to Ellaria when she spits on the ground and forward. How she strings Euron to say that he's going to get what he desires with a quick change of direction, and then after the war is won. It's a really great sequence, and we see that things are looking up for the crown in general. Euron needles Jaime with his little chants when they stand next to each other before we cut away. First about how the people love him, and Jaime wouldn't really know about that, would he? And then about how to make love to Cersei. In that exchange, Jaime reminds him that those people were after his sister during her walk of shame not all that long ago. And we get a nice realization that actually it doesn't actually matter whose heads are on a pike. The small folk just like severed heads, as Euron points out. He then takes a bow and he rolls out with Yara still in tow. Next, we learn what Cersei had planned out for her new prisoners. The exchange here is fantastic, and we learn that Cersei's level of brutality is amazing. As we're sitting there scratching our heads about why her lips look so strange, we see her deliver the kiss to Tyene and know just what she had in mind. You can't help feel for Ellaria here, who is absolutely a child murderer herself. The wickedness involved on both sides here is crazy, and in the end we know that she'll be kept alive, forcibly if necessary, to watch her daughter die of the poisoning that was just delivered. And not just that, she'll be there long after the long goodbye poison does its job. She'll be there for the rest of her life. And Cersei points out, you're going to watch your daughter rot and then turn to dust. Harsh. This apparently turns the queen on because she goes to visit Jaime and they make out for a moment and then she goes down on him to cap off a long day. We see them wake up the next morning in her chambers. We see that he's watching her sleep, which is kind of a gentle moment for this, I guess. And then someone comes to the door. He protests about her answering it, but she points out that she's the queen of the Seven Kingdoms and she can do whatever she wants. The servant who comes to the door is actually someone we've seen before, but I'll talk about that more in one of the follow-up videos. It's really not that important. Cersei's visitor is Tycho Nestoris from the Iron Bank, which I can't help thinking is Mycroft Holmes every time I watch one of his scenes. This is a good exchange between the two where he lays out their position, and she counters pretty much everything he says by channeling her inner Tywin. In the end, they agree for him to wait 2 weeks, and she promises that he'll be paid back. Back at Dragonstone, we get a good Jon and Tyrion scene where the latter quips that he came up there to brood, but now since Jon looks better at brooding than he does, he's starting to look like he's a failure at brooding, which is kind of funny. The main points here are, though, that Tyrion failed to see the Greyjoy attack coming. Jon wants to leave to get his people ready for the war that's coming. Everyone told Jon not to come, but he did anyways, and now he looks like a fool. Tyrion points out that Daenerys' cause is true, that she protects people from monsters just like he does, and that you can't really expect her to drop everything that's going on to fight an army of an enemy she's never seen for a man that she doesn't know. It's an unreasonable request, but is there anything that he can do to help? In the next scene, he explains to Daenerys that she should just give him some dragon glass because it's worthless to her anyways. Give him something by giving him nothing, basically. She asks what he thinks about the White Walkers and the Night King stuff, and he says he believes him because he actually came there. Against the advice of all of his advisors, he came south, and that has to mean something. Then she asks about what Davos meant by taking a knife in the heart for his people, and Tyrion basically just brushes that off. After that, we get the much anticipated one-on-one conversation between Jon and Daenerys. She moves a little in his direction, allowing him to mine the dragon glass, but won't go all the way to say she believes him about the Night King. She reinforces her stance to remove Cersei from the Iron Throne, which he says he wouldn't expect her not to do that. And I was just rewatching this, doing the screenshots, and I gotta say, the fanboy inside of me really came out. When she says, "You better get to work, Jon Snow," I mean, hell, hearing her say that name, and I mean, it's a long time in the making, right? So this was pretty awesome, you gotta say. After that, we check in on Winterfell. We see that Sansa is taking up the reins in Jon's absence and doing a pretty good job of it. After tasking those around her with stuff that needs done, she ends up with Littlefinger, and he tries to school her a little bit. I mentioned in the trailer breakdown already, so I won't go too deeply into it, but Sansa is becoming very likable, and, she handles him. You get the idea that she'll take what's useful from what he says and not really be swept up in all his self-serving nonsense. Luckily, their interaction does not last that long, and they're interrupted by Bran's return. Now, honestly, this is where, especially on the second watch, the episode gets sort of train wrecky for me. I mean, overall, I think it's one of the best episodes of late, but from here on out, things get noticeably worse than the first half. I'm a huge fan of Bran and his path in the story, and this reunion was awesome right up to the point where they start talking on some levels. I mean, either way, it's nice to see him, that he made it back, and too rushed and weird or not, that's a good thing. He seems to be a bit robotic these days, though, and I don't know, he can only explain a little bit to Sansa, and then he promptly freaks her out by talking about her wedding night. She goes back inside, and we learn that this is where that shot came from the trailers, and that he's going to stay there a little while longer. I don't know, it was just a little underwhelming. After that, we go back over to the Citadel and find out that Sam did indeed cure Jorah. I mentioned that I thought he might get better quick in my Sam and Jorah's purpose video from last week, but I wasn't expecting him to make a full recovery overnight, and that's exactly what happened. So basically, Ambrose says, hey, you can go. You're fine. You're not infected anymore. And as predicted, he says he is headed to see Daenerys. Sam extends his hand for a handshake, which is pretty cool when you think about it, because it's been a long time since Jorah could touch anyone, so it's not bad to have your first handshake after being cured with Sam. Ambrose had told Sam that he would speak to him later, and when they talk, he says that he pulled off a very difficult procedure and should be proud, which is very unexpected. Then he tells him he has to copy this huge pile of scrolls and manuscripts because they're rotting apart. And he should be glad to do it because he actually should get kicked out for what just happened. Then we get a short scene where Daenerys wants to take her dragons and sink Euron's fleet, but everybody else there advises against it. And this is a problem, right? She's too important to be flying around by herself on Dragonback, and no one else can go along or ride the dragons instead. I mean, that's just how it is, right? They talk about Casterly Rock, and then we go there. The sequence was edited in a way that it's enjoyable to watch. You hear Tyrion's voiceover, and he's telling Daenerys what the Unsullied will be up against as they use this tunnel that he knows about and built to get inside the gates, which we saw all that in the trailers. I had to smile a little bit when we saw that Tyrion's bed is still sitting there as they climb up out of the tunnel, the one he used to entertain his horrors. As we watch Grey Worm cutting his way through the defenders, it sort of dawns on us that they're able to take it a little bit too easily compared to what Tyrion's describing. And, they say, hey, there should be more people here. They're not here. He looks over the wall, sees Euron attacking the rest of their fleet. He picks up a dying Lannister soldier and asks where the rest of them are. And we cut to see them marching in formation. We see that they've come to sack Highgarden. And even though there's some dead soldiers and things, we don't actually see the attack. It just basically looks like Jaime walks right in. He tells Olenna upstairs that they fought as well as can be expected, and we get her swan song, basically. Pretty simply, the Lannisters gave up Casterly Rock because the forces of the Targaryen army wouldn't be able to hold it anyways. We already learned in the past that the gold had dried up there from Tywin, so after the plan for Euron to come in and burn their fleet, they're pretty much screwed. They have to cross the whole continent to get back. And now the crown gets all the valuable resources they need from taking over the Tyrells in their home. So in the end, he lets her take poison, so she does just that, but makes sure to go out with a bang by telling him it was her that poisoned Joffrey. As soon as Jaime says he made sure there'd be no pain in her death, she tells him it was her that put that plan in motion all along. And if you're a fan of Olenna, I suppose this was a fitting end of her story, as she really lays it on heavy as she describes how she killed Jaime's firstborn, and watching him choke his hands on his neck as he's choking to death. And she wants him to pass this on to Cersei because she wants her to know that she was the one who did it. From there we cut to the credits and the episode ends. I think this was a good episode, especially the first half, and I think I've found myself in a place where I can just accept some of the things that were really bothering me last season when it started out, but I'll get to that at the end. So if you didn't watch the beginning, scene by scene, welcome to the video. Some of the main points that I took notes on: the Melisandre thing was surprising that she's just taking herself out of the story at this point. So what do you guys think she's up to there? I really don't see her staying away. I mean, I know she says she's coming back to die, but what is she going to do in the meantime? I feel like she has a purpose there. Jon and Daenerys' meetup lived up to the hype. I mean, especially on the second watch, Dan and Dave and the director Mark Millard, they nailed this. It was really good. Like, for the amount of anticipation that's involved with something like this, it's really hard to say that nothing about it sucked. But really, nothing about it sucked. I mean, it was really, as a fan of the show, and then watching it again with a critical eye, I mean, I enjoyed it. The dialogue was fantastic. The acting was fantastic. Everything was good. One thing I really liked about this episode, I think, and I noticed this in his scenes where he was kind of going back and forth between Daenerys that was losing her patience with Jon, is Tyrion has pretty much gone back to his old self, like the old Tyrion that isn't just around to joke about shit. Like, he was one of my favorite characters, as I think most people, but in the last couple seasons, you know, his story has just he's gotten away from that. Let's just put it that way. In this episode, I really enjoyed the way that he was reading the situations. He was coming up with ways to keep things without exploding. And I don't know. I'm glad to see that he's back to that instead of the whole like, hey, trying to make jokes and drink with Grey Worm and Missandei. I thought it was interesting that Tycho brought up the fact that Euron's wooden ships wouldn't do so well against the dragons. It kind of shows how easily Daenerys could have rolled over Westeros if she had brought the heat like that. Of course, the downsides are real. There will be a lot of people that would die in King's Landing especially. But it reminds me at the end of the season last year, everyone was sort of taking stock on like how Cersei would actually be able to hold King's Landing for a second once Daenerys landed. And it didn't really come up that it would be her caution that, following directions from her advisors, that would be the great equalizer. Because on paper, I mean, she looked like she was going to roll over Westeros, and right now she's not. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Also, Daenerys obviously seems to be warming up to Jon's cause, but the story as such has things in a way that she's never going to be able to peel away from a war with Cersei for the Seven Kingdoms. So that's good. I mean, even though the battles are a little bit unrealistic in the way that they're getting where they have to get to and all that stuff, like, it is a bind. And based on what's going to come in the next episode, from what we can tell from the trailer, things will probably even out a little bit there. The reference to Maester Luwin keeping a copy of every Raven scroll seems important. We saw in the trailer again that Littlefinger may be up to some treachery whenever the unsheathing of the cat's paw blade there. And some people pointed out at the end of the trailer when she's looking at those papers that maybe that is those old scroll records that she's looking at. So there's some speculating to do there, like what might she find? The Bran thing, I mean, like, I don't know. Maybe I'm being unrealistic since I am a huge Bran Bloodraven part of the story fan. What did you guys think about it? To me, it seemed rushed. I don't like the idea that he can just see everything all the time so much. Like, I mentioned that in the first trailer breakdown, that I was hoping that he can't just roll back in his head whenever he feels like it and see everything. And it looks like that might be the case, or that they had him download the entirety of history or something. I don't know. I'm not willing to put that aside yet and say, oh, they messed up Bran's story completely. But for something as big as his return to Winterfell, it was underwhelming to say the least. So let's hope that goes in a better direction. I'm happy he's there, don't get me wrong. All of those scrolls and manuscripts that Sam was looking at, I have to imagine that there's something in there that he's going to find. Otherwise, what's the point of them being there? I thought it was a little bit odd that they didn't kick him out of the Citadel, honestly. But since they gave him that pile of stuff, that means that they wanted him to be there to find something in that, right? I mean, where else can we go there? He has to find out some knowledge about something. I mean, he's not really going to end up being a maester, I don't think. There's not enough time for that. So I was glad that he did cure Jorah. I did do a whole video about that last week. And I do think that Jorah will be important as far as bringing the forces together. But we'll have to see how that plays out. Yeah, and the big thing that I mentioned right at the beginning of this, like, there's just no way that some of this stuff could happen. Euron being at Casterly Rock is a big one. And, last year this kind of stuff was really bugging me. And I think, like, the best way that I have to deal with it is just, hey, this is the story, this is what's going to happen. Just forget about that stuff and enjoy it. And mostly I think I can. I just think that the second half of this episode just seemed kind of rushed, you know what I mean? Like the first half was fantastic. I mean, all of the dialogue, everything, it was just great. And then the second half, like all these things happened like boom, boom, boom. And it was a little too fast for me. But tell me what you think in the comments, and please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and set notifications. I've been doing a full schedule of Game of Thrones since the season started, and I plan to keep on doing that. I'll have a couple follow-up preview videos before the next episode airs. Go back and watch my video on the Hound if you haven't watched that. Since he wasn't in this episode, it is still completely relevant, so that's cool. Please follow me on Twitter, and thanks for watching, guys. I'll talk to you soon.